Female slaves were a large and diverse group of people who were exploited, abused, and oppressed by their masters and society. They had no rights, no freedom, and no dignity. They suffered from physical, emotional, and sexual violence. They endured hard labor, harsh punishment, and constant fear. They had little hope for a better future. Let's take a look at 7 tragic facts of female slaves in the ancient Roman Empire. Female slaves were often captured in war or sold into slavery by their families or enemies. One of the main sources of slaves in ancient Rome was war. The Romans were a militaristic and expansionist people who waged wars against many nations and tribes such as the Gauls, the Germans, the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Egyptians, and the Jews. These wars resulted in prisoners of war who were enslaved by the Romans. Many of these captives were women and children who were considered spoils of war. They were taken from their homes and families and transported to distant markets or states. Some of them were branded or tattooed to mark them as slaves. For example, after the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Roman general Titus enslaved about 97,000 Jews, many of whom were women and children. He paraded them in his triumphal procession of Rome and sold them as slaves in various provinces. Another source of slaves was poverty. Many families or individuals who couldn't afford to pay their debts or taxes sold themselves or their children into slavery. This was a common practice in ancient Rome, especially during times of economic crisis or social unrest. Sometimes, creditors or tax collectors would also seize debtors or defaulters and seize them as slaves. Sometimes, enemies or rivals would also sell each other to slavery as a form of revenge or humiliation. For example, during the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey in the 1st century BC, many Roman citizens were captured and enslaved by their opponents. Some of them were even crucified along the Appian Way as a warning to others. Female slaves had different roles and occupations depending on their skills, appearance, and luck. Some of them worked as domestic servants in households or farms where they performed various tasks such as cooking, cleaning, sewing, spinning, weaving, gardening, or nursing. These slaves were usually assigned to their masters by lot or by purchase. They had to work long hours and obey their masters' orders. They had no privacy or personal space. They could be rewarded or punished by their masters according to their performance or behavior. Some of them worked as artisans, traders, or professionals such as shopkeepers, midwives, or doctors. These slaves were usually trained by their masters or by other slaves. They had to pay a part of their earnings to their masters as rent or tax. They had some degree of autonomy and mobility. They could interact with other people and learn new skills or knowledge. However, many of them were also used as sex workers by their masters or others. Some of them worked in brothels, which were common places of entertainment for Roman men. These slaves were usually bought or rented by brothel owners or pimps. They had to serve multiple clients per day and satisfy their demands. They had no protection from disease or violence. They could be branded or tattooed to mark them as prostitutes. Some of them were forced to be concubines or prostitutes for their masters or guests. These slaves were usually chosen by their masters for their beauty or charm. They had to live with their masters or accompany them on trips. They had to please their masters sexually and emotionally. They had no say in their relationships or pregnancies. Female slaves had no control over their sexuality or reproduction. Female slaves were considered the property of their masters, who could use them sexually as they pleased. They had no right to refuse or resist their masters' advances. They had no protection from rape or abuse by their masters or others. They had no choice over their partners or pregnancies. They could be forced to marry or mate with other slaves or even animals. They could be separated from their spouses or children at any time. They could be sterilized or aborted by their masters. They could also be punished for being infertile or unfaithful. Female slaves were subject to the authority and whims of their masters, who could punish them for any reason or no reason at all. They had no legal rights or recourse against their masters' cruelty. They couldn't appeal to the law or the courts for protection or justice. They couldn't complain or resist their masters' orders or demands. They couldn't expect any mercy or compassion from their masters or society. They could be beaten, whipped, branded, mutilated, burned, crucified, or killed for any offense or disobedience. These punishments were often inflicted in public to deter other slaves from misbehaving or rebelling. They were also often disproportionate to the severity of the offense to demonstrate the master's dominance and authority. For example, a female slave who stole a loaf of bread could be flogged until she bled. A female slave who spoke back to her master could have her tongue cut off, and a female slave who tried to escape could have her feet chopped off. Some of the punishments were specifically designed to humiliate and degrade female slaves, such as having hot lead poured down their throat for adultery, being sewn into a sack with animals and thrown into the river for witchcraft, or being forced to wear a metal collar with a tag that said, "Hold me lest I flee," for running away. These punishments were meant to destroy the dignity and identity of female slaves, as well as to mark them as inferior and unworthy. They were also meant to satisfy the anger and lust of their masters or others who enjoyed seeing them suffer and die. Female slaves had little access to education and culture in ancient Rome. Most of them were illiterate and ignorant of the world outside of their masters' domains. They had no chance to learn how to read or write, how to speak other languages, how to play musical instruments, how to appreciate art or literature, or how to participate in religious rituals or festivals. Education and culture were considered privileges for the free and the elite, not for the enslaved and the lowly. Slaves were expected to work hard and obey their masters, not to pursue knowledge and leisure. Some of them were lucky enough to have masters who taught them some skills or knowledge, but they were still restricted by their status and gender. Some masters valued their slaves' intelligence and talent and trained them to be useful or entertaining. For example, some female slaves learned how to read or write Latin or Greek, how to perform arithmetic or accounting, how to recite poetry or play music, or how to heal wounds or diseases. They had no dreams, no aspirations, and no goals. They had no love, no friendship, and no family. They had nothing to look forward to, nothing to live for, and nothing to die for. These are just some of the tragic facts of female slaves in the ancient Roman Empire. So as you can see, female slaves were among the most oppressed and exploited people in history. They endured unimaginable hardships and horrors. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought about this topic. See you next time, and bye for now.